Welcome to the Hormone Optimizing Warrior MD, your reliable and trusted source for information on hormone therapy for menopause and beyond, and on how to advance into the second half of your life with confidence and optimism, knowing your hormones are optimized and balanced with everything else in your body. Whether it is hormone therapy, peptide therapy, laser therapy, or some other new technology applicable to maintaining our vitality, mental and physical strength, you will hear all about it in this podcast. Welcome back. In the past few weeks, I talked about the osteoporosis, what causes it, risk factors, how to diagnose it, and I talked about lifestyle changes, diet, nutrition, natural things to do to prevent osteoporosis. And now I finally get to talk about treatment. I started to talk about the treatment in the last week's episode because I talked about the dietary interventions, the basic things anyone can do in order to prevent osteoporosis. And my favorite saying is 1 ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. And this applies extraordinarily well to the osteoporosis treatment because osteoporosis itself is not very dangerous. You don't even know you have it unless you have a bone density test or you break a bone. It becomes important to women only because once they have it, they realize they have lost bone strength and they are at risk for a fracture. Breaking a bone equals a serious loss of independence and has a very, very negative impact on anyone's quality of life. And a major fracture, like a hip fracture or a spine fracture, can actually increase the risk of permanent morbidity and mortality. So I want to review the osteoporosis treatment costs from the perspective of benefit versus risk and side effects. In last week's episode, I reviewed the very simple things you can do, not just to prevent, but also to treat osteoporosis. Daily weight bearing and mechanical load exercise involving going to a fitness class, working with a trainer, but always additional weights, and some kind of impact type of exercise, running, jumping, walking, hiking, jumping on the trampoline, and weight resistance training. Also, it involves daily nutritional support for your bones, which will include protein, vitamins, minerals, and pretty much the essential nutrients your bones need. I'm not going to review that here. I've already talked about it last week. Now, all these interventions are highly beneficial. They have no risks, no side effects. Unless during your exercise you do something stupid and without supervision. And they're free. Now, you always should do mechanical load, weight resistance exercise every day, minimum for 30 minutes, and have a very healthy nutrition, which incorporates bone health supporting foods at almost every meal. There are also some big no-nos, interventions that make sense for anyone's health, not just to protect your bones, but other things, including your liver and your risk of cancer and so on and so forth, like avoiding alcohol, smoking, or avoiding exposure to toxins. And obviously, preventing falls, it's a very important strategy, and you should always incorporate it in your home or in your work environment if you're over the age of 50. Now, the best treatment for osteoporosis would be addressing the root cause, and that might be different depending on the person. When it comes to women after the age of 50 who clearly develop osteoporosis due to menopause, the root cause is obvious. It is estrogen deficiency. Therefore, the best treatment would be estrogen. After the WHI study findings were released in 2002, the standard of care for osteoporosis treatment moved away from estrogen therapy, which again is still the root cause, nothing changed, to drugs and medications. I will talk about these drugs and medications in the next episode, and I'll give you a very serious amount of information to consider about each class of available drugs, whether or not they would be appropriate depending on what situation, what will be the risks they carry. But first, I want to talk about why there has been such a major shift from treating the root cause of menopause-driven osteoporosis with estrogen therapy to non-hormonal options. Now, after 2002, even though estrogen therapy was associated with very minimally increased risk of breast cancer, blood clots, stroke, and heart disease, and even though this risk was with a very specific type of hormone therapy, that involved non-bioidentical estrogen, specifically estrogen with added progestin hormones, the recommendation was for all women to avoid hormone therapy for menopause. And this deprived women of the possibility of addressing the estrogen deficiency root cause of osteoporosis with a very valuable therapeutic modality and created the shift towards the modern osteoporosis drugs. Now, this was clearly a very big win for Big Pharma, who suddenly had a huge opportunity to push for the newly approved biphosphonate class of drugs to become standard of care for osteoporosis treatment. I've talked about estrogen and its major impact for bone health. A woman's bone matrix has estrogen receptors. I keep talking about this and reminding women every time I have a chance that they have estrogen receptors everywhere in their body. But for today's topic, it's very important to know that the bone has estrogen receptors, which influence both the bone destruction as well as the formation of new bone. If you didn't know, estrogen, and I might have talked about this in the past episode, directly impacts the activity of osteoclasts, the cells that destroy bone. A woman's estrogen is highly valuable in protecting a woman's bone mass and bone strength because estrogen directly reduces the activity and the lifespan of the osteoclasts, the cells that destroy bone. But the main mechanism of bone support is by promoting osteoblast function and survival, which means that the overall estrogen that a woman has is absolutely required for positive bone remodeling outcome, where the new bone formation is ahead of the destruction of old bone in order to maintain a healthy and strong bone matrix. And just to be clear, I'll talk about that more next week, there is no medication in the world that is going to do that for a woman's body. No medication is going to do for your bones what estrogen is doing for your bones. No drug is going to support bone remodeling the way estrogen does, because no medication on the face of this earth, so far approved by the FDA, can actually work like estrogen. So we judge the efficacy of all osteoporosis drugs by looking at how they help preserve the natural quality of bone. How can they maintain the integrity and the thickness required for normal strength? How do they tilt the balance towards bone preservation? And ultimately, how can they help preserve the structural quality of the bone by improving mineral density on a test? And estrogen does all of those things, pretty much with no side effects, because it's your own natural hormone. More importantly, estrogen supports muscle mass, which is critical in the normal functioning of any woman. It's critical for mobility, for balance, for protection of your bones in case there's a fall or a blunt trauma to the bone. None of the osteoporosis drugs promote or sustain the health of muscle fibers for women. More so, testosterone is one of the most powerful anabolic hormones that a woman can possess. I can't say that enough for women to hear it. Obviously, estrogen is a highly valuable bone strength and muscle strength supporting hormone, and so is the growth hormone. I reviewed all the anabolic hormones in the first episode when I talked about the causes for osteoporosis, and I talked about the hormonal imbalance and deficiency and how that is driving the weakening of a woman's bones as she ages after menopause. I also discussed how menopause is a critical event in a woman's life, which deprives her not just of estrogen, but also of progesterone and testosterone, of which testosterone is already known to promote muscle mass, strength, and contribute to bone strength. It's also pretty widely known, and it's common knowledge, that in women, even modest amounts of testosterone can have a meaningful anabolic effect on not just muscle, but also on bone. I told you that bone tissue has receptors for estrogen. Well, it also has receptors for testosterone. There are also receptors for weaker androgens like DHEA in the bone. So that's interesting. As women age and their DHEA really declines. But there's no studies to prove that DHEA it's actually significantly improving bone density. And too much DHEA can actually have bad consequences. Now, there are quite a few studies published on testosterone effect on bone mineral density. And more interestingly, it has been shown that women with naturally elevated testosterone levels like PCOS or hirsutism have better bone density when compared to the similar normal young women that have lower testosterone levels. This has been shown to be true for testosterone therapy as well. And interestingly enough, androgenic progestins, those are synthetic cousins of the natural progesterone, have been proven to have an increased improvement in mineral density when combined with estrogen therapy. And of course, it is widely known and accepted that all androgens in general, but testosterone in particular, increase muscle mass and muscle strength. More so, it is also widely known and accepted that testosterone therapy in women leads to the very significant improvement in their physical activity, which by itself will improve bone strength and bone mineral density, right? Women get more motivated, more driven, more interested in exercising when they have testosterone. There's also clear evidence that the benefit of exercise, which leads to mechanical loading on the bone, when combined with hormone therapy, is much more effective at generating a favorable increased bone remodeling response, promoting stronger bones, and giving a woman improved bone density than either therapy alone. So if you exercise and a year later you check your bone density, you give it your best shot. You do everything you can. You work with a personal trainer, you start weightlifting, and you do a bone density test, and you don't exercise like crazy, but just normal. You use estrogen and testosterone, maybe progesterone too, because you need it, and you repeat the bone density. If you do both, the increase in bone density is significantly better than if you do either one of these alone. So again, if you do hormone therapy, but sit on the couch, or you have a very sedentary lifestyle, and if you exercise like crazy, but have no hormones, you will never achieve as much of an improvement in bone density and bone strength as you could had you decided to do both, work out like crazy and use hormone therapy at the same time. Food for thought, right? The benefits of exercise, diet, and hormone therapy combined are probably sufficient for the majority of women that are entering or have been in menopause and beyond and are diagnosed with osteoporosis to just use as treatment intervention. Now, if we're talking about advanced osteoporosis, some immediate bone protection to stop the bone destruction process might be necessary. And if the risk and the benefit profile for that medication is acceptable to the woman in question, I'm all for it. However, when it comes to osteoporosis caused by the loss of estrogen at menopause, considering that the root cause of such osteoporosis is the actual hormonal deficiency created by the loss of ovarian function, I personally believe that the best therapy, which would be able to prevent a worsening of the osteoporosis and perhaps allow a reversal of the bone loss, would be therapy with estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone as indicated by the other symptoms of menopause and combined with all the interventions I talked about in last week's episode. Dietary support with protein, vitamins, minerals, exposure to vitamin D or intake of vitamin D with K2, and significant weight-bearing and mechanical loading on the bones with weight-bearing exercise, impact exercise, and weightlifting. Now, I'm going to say and remind you again that the bioavailability of the chosen method for hormone therapy does matter when it comes to osteoporosis. If you decide to apply an estradiol cream, it takes away your hot flashes, you're happy, but that only gives you an estradiol level for less than a third of the 24 hours in the day, you will likely not have a significant response in your bone density improvement. Maybe you might get a lower rate of destruction. There have been studies that show a certain level of estradiol is required in order for the hormone therapy to have an impact on the bone density. And that likely varies from woman to woman, but it's very unlikely that an estrogen level under 50 picograms per milliliter would be beneficial for osteoporosis or promote increased bone mineral density. That's why I like to test. That's why I like to have evidence and data on how the hormones are working in your body. Just doing the lowest dose patch when you have no estrogen and you start at 0, it's likely not going to have an impact. So you need to know what the hormone therapy you have chosen is doing to your levels. We clearly need more research to accurately determine what is the optimal range for estradiol during hormone therapy for menopause to significantly and meaningfully influence bone mineral density. All that research, which was ongoing, and we have quite a few studies from the 1990s, was stopped because the interest shifted in the past 2 or 3 decades to FDA-approved drugs, like the biphosphonates, the biologics, or the SERMs, which I'll talk about next week. Let me move on to the next little topic that I want you to consider when I discuss root cause of menopause-driven osteoporosis. There is significant lack of discussion or research around treating growth hormone adult onset deficiency. Why? Because it's commonly accepted that your growth hormone is going to decline as you age. So some people don't have a declining growth hormone and they do a lot better. They have stronger muscles, stronger bones, no diabetes, very nice lipid profile. They keep their weight. They're optimistic. They're energetic. They do well. They age well. The others, well, it's just aging. It is well known that growth hormone plays a direct role in bone formation and that growth hormone deficiency is significantly correlated to a decrease in bone density and an increase in fracture risk. Growth hormone and IGF-1 are very unique hormones because they are able to stimulate the osteoblasts, which are the bone-building cells. Without the right amount of growth hormone, the bone formation will be inadequate and the bone breakdown will continue. So the mechanism of osteoporosis in growth deficiency will mainly be the reduced capacity to build new bone. Now, I've talked in the past, and I'm going to talk about it again, how at menopause women get hit with the perfect trifecta. They lose their estrogen, which is one of the most important bone remodeling hormones for women. Number 1 hormone, right, for bones. They've already lost testosterone way before menopause, probably 1 decade before menopause, which again is one of the most important anabolic, muscle-building, bone-building hormone in a woman's body and a motivator for exercise, right? For stamina, for endurance and recovery during exercise and after exercise. And interestingly enough, by the age of menopause, 50 years old, the average age for menopause, any woman would have actually lost half, 50% of her growth hormone. It is fairly common knowledge that growth hormone production starts declining after the age of 30s and continues at a steady decline of 14% or so per each decade of life until the end of life. Now, do you want to know what's interesting? What's interesting is that premenopausal women can actually have very good growth hormone levels because estrogen stimulates growth hormone and IGF-1 production. And that's interesting to know. And I think not many people talk about this because for some reason, growth hormone is still taboo, has this whole fear around, oh my God, it's going to cause cancer. Nobody can have growth hormone. So there's not a lot of talk about this. But as it turns out, when your estrogen drops at menopause, you not only lose estrogen, but you also lose the support that estrogen was giving in maintaining your growth hormone production. And the growth hormone production will decline much, much quicker than it would be expected just from an age-related decline perspective, just because a woman enters menopause. And that is the perfect trifecta. Women lose their 3 most important hormones that are required to keep their bone strength going: estrogen, testosterone, and growth hormone. It is very simple to measure growth hormone. A blood level of IGF-1 should be highly informative. I talked before about how growth hormone has a pulsatile, sometimes erratic pattern of release from the pituitary gland, and how it's impossible to interpret from a random single blood draw what a growth hormone release pattern actually is. That's why we use IGF-1 as a proxy. IGF-1 is really not influenced by food intake or time of day, but many doctors or prescribers do prefer early morning blood draws mainly to compare the blood draws level after a certain intervention and to maintain standardization. Most of the time is also because the doctor will likely look at fasting glucose, lipid profile, insulin, and other markers, which usually require early morning fasting blood draws. Now, this is not a podcast about growth hormone. However, it's useful to know that high levels of biotin might interfere with the correct evaluation of IGF-1. So if you're taking a supplement with a large amount of biotin, maybe Nutrafol, stop taking it about 72 or at least 48 hours before you have a scheduled IGF-1 blood draw. Now, if there is a growth hormone deficiency, 99% of doctors are not prepared to treat hormone deficiency, just as most doctors are not really prepared to treat estrogen deficiency or testosterone deficiency properly. Unfortunately, if there is a diagnosed growth hormone deficiency, as evidenced by low levels of IGF-1, most doctors are not really prepared to deal with it or to make a reasonable recommendation on what to do other than sending you to an endocrinologist. And unfortunately, in spite of the black box warning being removed from estrogen products, and in spite of the fact there's more awareness around the possibility that estrogen therapy is not as harmful as women were led to believe, women still do not have an FDA-approved testosterone product. And both men and women do not have any FDA-approved therapy for growth hormone deficiency. Somatotropin is the only FDA-approved medication for growth hormone deficiency. And here's the dilemma. We know that growth hormone declines with age, which in reality is a deficiency in as of itself. We probably age because we lose our hormones. However, whether this is a deficiency worth treating with hormones as a replacement is where the dispute is and where the controversy lives right now. Just like menopause, somatopause, the medical treatment for growth hormone deficiency, is considered normal aging, and it's not considered a disease. Again, not different than menopause, which is not considered a disease. Now, out of curiosity, just because I didn't want to do a lot of research, I asked AI, what is the definition of disease? I got a pretty interesting answer. I'm going to read it out to you. There is no universally agreed upon definition, and apparently this is a debated concept in medicine and the philosophy of science, with the agreement that most definitions converge on a few core elements. A disease is defined as an abnormal condition that impairs normal physiological or psychological function involving a specific cause like an outside pathogen, a hormonal imbalance, or an injury with a characteristic set of signs and symptoms and some degree of harm or dysfunction to the organism. Again, you can rewind and play it again. This is the definition that I got from using Claude, the AI tool. Obviously, there's a disclaimer saying Claude is AI, can make mistakes, so double check the response. So I checked Merriam-Webster's dictionary, which defines disease as an impairment of the normal state of the body, where one of its parts, in our case, the ovary, interrupts or modifies the performance of the vital functions and is manifested by signs and symptoms and could be a response to environmental factors, infectious agents, defects of organisms like genetics, or a combination of these factors. Now, it is very obvious that a decreased output of a natural hormone, which has been providing support for normal physiology for a woman's body for 4 decades, would classify as a deficiency, therefore would be considered a disease and require treatment. And this is where the dispute currently lies, whether this is ethical or philosophical. And this dispute does have very important consequences for women's health, because if you do not accept that menopause is a disease, then treatment is not mandatory. Treatment becomes something you get at someone's discretion. And that seems very dangerous to me. And this is very, very true for estrogen therapy after menopause. This is true for testosterone therapy for women. This is true for testosterone therapy in men. It's also true for treatment of adult onset growth hormone deficiency, which is not accepted as a true deficiency as it is supposedly a consequence of aging. Interestingly enough, there are lots of people who age with excellent growth hormone output. Like I said before, they do well. They have great bone strength, muscle strength, mental strength, and they look good too. So why can they have it and others cannot? The opposite is unfortunately true for the great majority of people who do not age well at all. They don't have excellent growth hormone output, and they're going to fit in the big box category of the population in which growth hormone continues to decline 15% regularly, inexorably, every decade until death. Now, longevity-focused physicians are important because they're aware of all of these. They are at the forefront of all these regenerative interventions, and they're firm believers in hormone therapy. Now, longevity-focused physicians are not necessarily trying to make people live forever. We know that's impossible. But hoping to extend one's life is not wrong, and it's not against the law. Longevity-focused physicians are ultimately trying to correct what they know causes death and aging. And guess what? Anabolic hormone deficiency is one of those causes of aging and death because of all its consequences, right? Loss of bone strength, loss of muscle strength, loss of cognitive function, etc. One of the biggest complaints against longevity-based medicine is that it markets interventions way ahead of data and makes claims that are not sustainable. Now, it is very true that longevity-promoting interventions do not always have completed human trials using FDA products, proving that, let's say, a therapy like a vitamin therapy, a supplement therapy, a peptide therapy, an exosome therapy, a stem cell therapy extend functional life. We don't have that, right? But due to the World Wide Web and now AI on top of that, the truth is that the regular person who wants to live longer and who doesn't mind spending money trying to live longer is not going to wait for the FDA to approve a therapy before they're willing to try it. So people travel to Mexico and all kinds of places to get these therapies that are not FDA approved here. Now, coming back to the osteoporosis, I'm sorry about this little detour. I personally prefer addressing a disease process, which is why I ultimately prefer to treat osteoporosis by utilizing natural treatment and natural resources, working with a woman's body's nutrition, with her mechanical load, which means exercise and activity, looking at improving the muscle mass and the hormone balance is something I prefer, and it's first-line strategy in my book. I am a completely conventional medicine trained physician, but I'm also an anti-aging board certified physician with training in longevity medicine. I have read articles, books, and lots of research focused on longevity medicine in the past decade. The main downside with FDA-approved medications is the fact that they do not fix a broken mechanism. In next week's episode, I will tell you all about FDA-approved medications for osteoporosis. I will talk about the biphosphonates, Prolia, the anabolic agents, the selective estrogen receptor modulators, and maybe considering a combination of treatments, which might be the best choice and necessary for some women. So join me next week as I end this, what I hoped was a very valuable series on bone strength discussion and anti-aging. And as it comes to its closing chapter, I will discuss the FDA-approved medication for osteoporosis and how to choose between them. Thank you for the time and energy you spent listening to my podcast. If this episode or another have caught your attention and delivered valuable information you have not heard anywhere else, and if you feel I have succeeded in my mission to provide the how to stay healthy and age beautifully, please leave me a review. And any suggestion to improve the podcast will help make it better for you and for others. You can send my staff a message directly by sending an email to receptionist@herahealthcare.info.